you might have heard about this ongoing epidemic. No, I'm not talking about COVID. Unfortunately, I'm talking about a much darker one, boiling just under the surface, destroying millions of lives. Today we will be focusing on the opioid epidemic. It involves the medical world, big pharma, and the distribution of illegal drugs. We will focus on what opioids are, their origin, and much more. So make sure to watch the whole video so you don't miss any important information. Now let's paint the opioid epidemic picture. Imagine it's 1992, you're living in the United States, and you have been working all your life in construction. When you were younger, things were great. You felt like Superman and could lift almost any weight. Your job was easy and you did it with ease. Now, many years later, things took a turn for the worse. It all started with this back pain, which kept on getting worse and worse and worse. Your doctor called it arthrosis, but there was nothing he could do for you, so he prescribed you painkillers for pain relief. First paracetamol, later he added naproxen, but these last 2 years the pain was unbearable. You needed to call in sick several times at work, couldn't do your daily household chores, and frequently had to cancel social activities. This is when your doctor started to prescribe you opioids, a very effective but addictive painkiller. And these first few weeks they worked wonders. You almost felt whole again. But soon their effect decreased and your doctor upped the dose. Again, with this increased dose you experienced superb pain relief. But this time it diminished even more rapidly. This kept on happening up until the point your doctor refused to further increase your dose. He even told you that he would taper off your dose and eventually he would stop prescribing you opioids completely. Well, your doctor pulled the handbrake a little too late. You were in too deep. You were convinced that you needed the opioids and remember the vague acquaintance which could sell you some aftermarket pills for a good price. This is the start of a terrible story, spiraling down into a bottomless pit. Without the supervision of a doctor, doses of opioids are frequently upped, up until far above the therapeutic window, which has huge consequences for someone's medical health as well as for someone's family life, work life, and it can have huge impact on society as a whole. Without immediate professional help, this story does not end well. And do not think this story is rare or exaggerated. It's almost a classic tale of how opioid addiction starts. It often starts with mental or physical pain someone's trying to numb. This leads to frequent substance use, which contributes to the buildup of tolerance of the drug of choice. Someone needs more and more of this drug to experience a similar effect. Ultimately, this leads to the buildup of tolerance, dependence, and addiction, with all the associated consequences. Unfortunately, this is happening to millions of people worldwide being prescribed opioids. Let's talk numbers so you can feel the severity of this problem. The number of opioid prescriptions in the United States alone in 2020 were, hold on to your seat, 142,816,781, or 43.3 prescriptions per 100 Americans. It's estimated that about 3 million Americans and 16 million people worldwide are suffering from an opioid addiction. And now for the most tragic fact, more than 932,000 people have died since 1999 from a drug overdose, of which nearly 75% is caused by opioids. This means the problem is massive, which leaves us with the question, how did we end up at this place and how can we get out? And the answer starts with opioids themselves. If you know more about them, it suddenly all starts to make sense. So first of all, what are opioids? They are substances which bind to the opioid receptors in our bodies. Most commonly, these receptors are found in our nervous system. And up to 17 different types of opioid receptors have been described, but most importantly are the three following, the mu, kappa, delta types. And here it is important to mention that each type of opioid has a unique binding affinity with all the different types of receptors. So for example, a certain type of opioid has a strong connection with the mu receptor, but only a weak affinity for the kappa receptor. This matters because activating or suppressing a certain type of receptor leads to a specific response. And because this very quickly becomes very complex, we will focus on the most important and most impactful responses in this video. So a strong connection and activation of the mu receptor in your brain leads to the release of a lot of endorphins in the reward system of your brain. This can cause pain relief, sedation, euphoria, physical dependence, and respiratory depression. A strong connection with the kappa receptor leads to strong spinal pain relief, meiosis, which are pinpoint pupils, hallucinations, and paranoia, and a strong connection with the delta receptor leads mostly to pain relief. Through stimulation or inhibition of all of the involved receptors, so all of the 17 opioid receptors, among others, the following effects can occur: pain relief, sleepiness, relaxation, euphoria, nausea, vomiting, constipation, slow breathing, dyspepsia, drowsiness, tiredness, confusion, dizziness, a headache, itching, and several mental health effects. As you probably know by now, certain types of opioids are actively prescribed by doctors. The unique binding affinity of an opioid in combination with the dose, the method of administration, your tolerance, and genetics contribute to the variety of effects different opioids can cause, which gives some of them specific use cases in the medical world. Considering their effect, you will not be surprised that the primary reason for prescription is pain relief, mostly when dealing with post-surgical pain and severe pain due to trauma or disease. In most medical guidelines, opioids are only prescribed to treat acute pain and not chronic pain. To a lesser extent, opioids can be prescribed to suppress diarrhea, coughing, and as replacement therapy for opioid use disorder. Commonly prescribed opioids are oxycodone, hydrocodone, methadone, codeine, fentanyl, morphine, and tramadol, which may be given orally by a skin patch under the tongue or through an injection. While other types of opioids are illegal, these are most commonly used as recreational drugs for their euphoric effects. Common illegal opioids are opium, heroin, and illegally sourced oxycodone, morphine, fentanyl, and codeine. Now, before we continue with more awesome information on the history of opioids, I want to ask you to click the like and subscribe button. These videos cost me a lot of time and effort to make. If you want to support the channel, just click the like and subscribe button. This means the world to me and will help me to make more awesome videos. I hope you're learning a lot. Now let's continue. Now you're all caught up on opioids, how they work and what effects they can have, but this is only a small piece of the complex opioid epidemic puzzle. To put this into more perspective, it's important that you see the history of opioids, their origin, and the stranglehold they have had since the beginning of time on humanity. Now the history of opioids starts with the first poppy plants being found in archaeological sites. The first sites where these plants were found in abundance date back to 5700 before Christ, during a period called the New Stone Age. This is important because the poppy plant contains codeine and morphine, and it's thought that people back then were already using it for its recreational euphoric effects. In the years which followed, it was spread to Italy, Egypt, India, China, and Greece, where it was consumed for medical, recreational, and religious purposes. If we fast forward a little bit in time to the 1500s, Europe forgot all about the poppy plant and all about opium, up until it was reintroduced by the physician Paracelsus, where it was hailed in Europe as a wonder drug. As you might imagine, physicians back then created some effective marketing, and in combination with the highly addictive nature of opium, this created a huge market for it. So back then it was used in massive quantities already. To put that into perspective, if we go to the 1700s, in the 1700s, the British East India Company, at its peak the largest corporation in the world, with an army twice the size of the British Army, had a huge economic deficit from the import of Chinese tea, which back then was extremely expensive, and they wanted to balance their finances by creating a monopoly on opium. This led to not one, but to two opium wars with China, painting the picture on how many people were using opium and how big the market already was back then. A little later, during the 18th and the 19th century, there were a lot of advancements in medicine and in science, leading to the discovery that, as already mentioned, opium consists out of morphine and codeine. And in the years which followed, chemists were able to isolate morphine and codeine, and Mr. Alexander Wood developed a glass syringe with a needle. This at last made it possible to inject measurable dosages of certain drugs into the bloodstream with a glass syringe. This of course was a huge step for medicine in general, but also made it possible for the first time to inject accurate doses of morphine. Again, the medical world embraced morphine as a wonder drug. Back then, it was already used to ease pain, help people sleep, decrease diarrhea, and suppress coughing. However, it could be prescribed almost without restrictions because doctors unfortunately assumed that morphine would not be addictive when injected. And let's imagine what happened. Appraised drugs, easily available and very, very addictive. You can imagine that back then the morphine usage numbers were sky high. So that was an oopsie. Therefore, pharmaceutical companies were looking for a new morphine, which was less potent and preferably less addictive. So synthetic opioids were developed with a similar effect as morphine. This led to the creation of diamorphine, brand name heroin. Of course, it was immediately mass-produced and sold as an over-the-counter substitute for morphine, supposedly without the addictive side effect, and of course this was all claimed without any actual medical research. Which, as you can guess, led to a second public health crisis. Because heroin was not less, but even more addictive than morphine. In the years which followed, hundreds of opioid compounds were found and studied, and the most famous one being the ones we know today: oxycodone, methadone, tramadol, and fentanyl. And finally, our government started to figure out that opioids were no wonder drugs, but were in fact huge threats to the public health. Therefore, the United States started to control its sales in 1914. From then out, heroin and other opioids could only be prescribed and sold for medical purposes. However, because of the extreme addiction rates heroin was causing, this was not enough. And then, by 1925, heroin was the first opioid in the United States to be fully banned. As you can imagine, the market for heroin was still huge a few years after the incident, because there was still a lot of people addicted. And this led to some creative chemists making chemical compounds which were quite similar to heroin, but not exactly heroin, which led to the invention of designer drugs, creating a certain cat-and-mouse game between the governments and these creative chemists, which continued all the way up to 1930 until the US government caught up again. That year, all heroin-like designer drugs were also banned if they did not have any therapeutic advantage over the already existing drugs. In the years which followed, heroin remained popular, even though it was found illegal in most countries. In part, this can be explained because of its addictive nature and because of its prevalence among famous musicians and popular culture. Some well-known users are Billie Holiday, Charlie Parker, Ray Charles, Kurt Cobain, and John Lennon, which all build up to the current opioid crisis. And as history learned us, this is nothing new. In fact, since we found out the existence of the poppy plant, we have been struggling with the usage of opioids. However, that doesn't mean the situation is any less serious. On the contrary, since the 1990s, there has been a rapid increase in overuse, abuse, and overdose due to opioids. And this current opioid crisis started in the United States in the late 1990s, because there were about 100 million people dealing with chronic pain, which meant a huge market for painkillers. And due to this high demand of patients in combination with incentives from big pharma and some government-driven policies, the number of opioid prescriptions increased each year. From 76 million in 1991 to 219 million in 2011 to 289 million in 2016. At first, patients started using opioid as prescribed, but as history learned us, this often goes wrong, as is proven by recent studies. About 4.3% of patients being prescribed opioids continues to use them after the initial prescription, leading, in some cases, to the classic buildup of tolerant dependence and addiction. Furthermore, these huge numbers of opioid uses can be partly explained by their ease of use. A lot of people are in pain, and opioids are amazing painkillers. Take a pill and voila! Other potential long-term solutions often require way more time, are more invasive, require more effort and/or money. Think about changes in your lifestyle, like your diet, more exercise, stress reduction, and therapy, such as surgery, psychotherapy, and/or physical therapy. All are potential long-term solutions, but people often want and require solutions now. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle: impact of the opioid crisis. And as you can imagine, opioid abuse soon leads to significant medical, social, psychological, and economical consequences, not only for the user, but also for their families, employers, and society as a whole. First of all, the financial impact. An analysis from the US Congress Joint Economic Committee found that the opioid epidemic cost the US nearly $1.5 trillion in 2020, which was up 37% from 2017. This comes chiefly from the impact of opioid use on the labor force. Workers which abuse opioids take about 50% more days of unscheduled leave, and they are way more likely to experience occupational injuries. Opioid usage can also lead to problems in someone's personal and family life, the relationship he or she has with his or her spouse, and the way someone is able to raise children. Recent studies have found that children growing up with parents that are abusing opioids are more likely to experience maltreatment, neglect, and traumas, creating future problems when these children become adults. Next is the medical impact of long-term opioid usage. Growing evidence indicates that there are multiple serious long-term effects of opioid treatment. It may cause serious problems in your endocrine, immune, cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal, and neural systems. Furthermore, it could lead to complications such as fractures, infections, cardiovascular complications, sleep-disordered breathing, bowel dysfunction, and cancer development. Last but not least, frequent use of opioids leads to the buildup of tolerance. Someone needs a higher and higher dose, and this of course increases the risk for an overdose and also increases the mortality rates. When overdosing opioids, there is a huge stimulation of the mu-opioid receptor. This causes a very strong sedative effect on the respiratory center of the medulla oblongata, which is a part of your central nervous system. This leads to respiratory depression, or in other words, your breathing rate is slowed down so much you do not inhale enough oxygen. This causes respiratory failure and ultimately death. Which brings us to the final part of this video. What can you do and how can we get out of this mess? Well, first of all, it's important to mention that opioid addiction as well as an overdose are preventable with proper and quick medical care, which makes it very important that you know when to contact your doctor. So, contact your doctor if you're taking opioids and you develop tolerance, if you're taking more than you're prescribed, if you have used opioids for more than several days in a row, and if you feel like your life is affected by your opioid usage. Common first signs of an opioid use disorder are changes in your behavior, like spending more time alone, losing interest in activities, mood swings, sleeping at odd hours, getting in trouble with the law, and financial hardships. Next up, it's very important you are able to recognize an opioid overdose, as this may save someone's life. So remember these three symptoms: unconsciousness, pinpoint pupils, as well as a very slow breathing rate. If you do see those in a patient, immediately call an ambulance, as someone might be having an opioid overdose. Considering everything, this opioid epidemic is a very difficult problem we humans have been dealing with since 5700 before Christ. But we have come a long way since then. We have science, developed medical care, and elaborated support systems. And I hope we are able, these coming years, to actively fight this epidemic and get rid of it for once and for all. Therefore, I want to do some final suggestions we as humanity can strive for together. Only prescribe and use opioids for several days to manage acute pain. Take the lowest possible dose for the shortest amount of time, exactly as prescribed. Safeguard your opioid medication to protect your family and community, and dispose unused opioids properly. And for healthcare providers, increase the availability of opioid dependence treatment, reduce and prevent irrational or inappropriate opioid prescribing, monitor opioid prescribing and dispensing, and limit inappropriate over-the-counter sales of opioids. Well, I hope this video is able to smash a dent in this opioid epidemic. I hope you know now that opioids are not safe. In fact, they are very addictive and can be dangerous. I hope you're able to act responsibly when your doctor prescribed you opioids, and please share this video with your loved ones, because educated people can make healthier decisions, which is the whole point of this channel. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. And for those who want to keep on learning, please like and subscribe to this video. I'm posting regular content with more awesome videos. Also, check out my secondary channel it's called How to Medicate Drugs and More. I post there weekly videos on how to use a certain type of drug, certain type of medication, and check out the Instagram, TikTok, Facebook for more content. See you next week with a new video. Bye bye.